Good morning, everyone. We now come to the first item of business today, item 508 on the agenda, the draft cathedrals measure for first consideration. For this item, members will need a copy of the draft measure, which is GS 2136, and the explanatory notes, a memorandum, which is GS 2136X. Please also refer to the financial comments on the fifth notice paper, the green booklet, and members might also like to have to hand GS MISC 1223. Please take note that we have passed the time when requests to speak can be processed for this debate. Thus, members will need to signal that they would like to be called to speak in the usual way when the motion is open for debate. So, I call upon the Chair of the Steering Committee, Canon Robert Hammond, to move item 508, that the measure entitled Cathedrals Measure be considered for revision in committee. You have up to 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Robert Hammond, Chelmsford 273. Members of Synod, cathedrals, or more precisely Chelmsford Cathedral, is part of my family DNA. My father was a choir boy there, my parents were married there, I was baptised there, I went to Sunday school there, I went to the youth group there, I was confirmed there, I ran the youth group there, I've been on cathedral council, I was on congregational council. Along with all the deanery lay chairs in Chelmsford Diocese, I was made a lay canon of the cathedral 4 years ago. I'm still a Eucharistic assistant, and although we no longer live in Chelmsford, I still happily travel there when I'm on duty. The cathedral is our family church. It's my family church, and it matters to me. So cathedrals matter to me. And perhaps that's part of why I'm extremely happy to be standing here before you today introducing this draft cathedrals measure. Before I set out some of the key points of the draft measure, let me remind Synod of some of the background. The Cathedrals Measure 1999 sets out the current statutory framework for cathedrals and provides for the regulation of a number of cathedral activities by the Church Commissioners. In response to a request from the Bishop of Peterborough following his 2017 visitation to Peterborough Cathedral, the Archbishop set up the Cathedrals Working Group, which was asked to look at how the legislation governing cathedrals was operating and whether any improvements could be made. The working group considered the existing governance structures of cathedrals, with particular focus on financial management, major building projects, safeguarding, accountability, oversight and scrutiny. In its final report in the June 2018, the working group set out its recommendations for the future regulation of cathedrals. The most significant of these recommendations proposed the reform of the current governance structure of cathedrals and bringing them in line with the jurisdiction of the Charity Commission. This synod endorsed the report in July 2018 and requested that the Archbishop's Council bring forward a draft measure for first consideration at the General Synod in July 19, this synod, to give effect to those recommendations that involve legislative change. This draft measure reflects those of the report's recommendations that require legislative change. While most of the legislative recommendations in the report are understood to have the general support among the cathedral community, there may be specific recommendations which do not have such support. Should Synod members wish to do so, they may submit proposals to the Revision Committee to amend any clause in the draft measure in the usual way, and can I encourage you to do that? The Third Church Estates Commissioner has overseen engagement with the cathedral community and its representative bodies to discuss what support cathedrals will need to make the improvements and changes required by the draft measure. As a result of this engagement, the Church Commissioners have approved significant additional funding for cathedrals in the next triennium to support cathedrals to make the necessary changes. So what are the key governance changes? Firstly, chapters and councils. At present, the body corporate of a cathedral is comprised of three bodies: the chapter, the council and the College of Canons. Cathedral councils have a number of statutory functions under the 1999 measure, including receiving and considering the cathedral's budget, annual report, accounts, and revising the constitution and statutes. However, cathedral councils have no power to act if it considers there are problems with the way a cathedral is being governed. Therefore, the report recommended that cathedrals should no longer be required to have a council and that all trustee functions should sit with one body, an expanded chapter. The draft measure provides for an expanded chapter with a majority of non-executive members. The chapter's executive members are the dean and the residentiary canons as the praying heart of the cathedral. All members of the expanded chapter are its charity trustees. The draft measure still enables chapters to set up a cathedral council should they wish to do so. However, such a council would not be part of the cathedral's body corporate and would only have those functions conferred on it by the chapter. Secondly, safeguarding. The draft measure provides that members of cathedral chapters will be required to have due regard to the House of Bishops' safeguarding guidance. In addition, the disqualification provisions for PCC membership in the new church representation rules are replicated in the draft measure, so they will apply to chapter members in a similar way as to PCC members. Thirdly, and very close to my heart, parish church cathedrals. The draft measure confers power on the church commissioners to make a scheme similar to a pastoral reorganisation scheme, so that those cathedrals and parishes who have a parish but no longer wish to have one can cease to have a parish. The other significant recommendation that the draft measure addresses is around the proposed co-regulation by the Charity Commission and the Church Commissioners. A key recommendation of the report was for cathedrals to be brought within the definition of charity in the 2017 Act, so that they will come within the Charity Commissioner's jurisdiction in the same way as other bodies of the Church of England, such as parochial church councils. Cathedrals are civic and public buildings, as well as places of worship. Bringing cathedrals within the Charity Commission's jurisdiction recognises the wider benefit they provide to their local communities, making them more accountable to the general public. The cathedral deans met at Windsor earlier this year to consider the theology of cathedral governance, and you have the notes of that consultation as GS MISC 1223. They noted that co-regulation of cathedrals by the Church Commissioners and the Charity Commission reflected the affiliation of cathedrals to both the Church and the State. The College of Deans also voted unanimously to support bringing cathedrals within the jurisdiction of the Charity Commission. The report recommends that there should be more rather than less oversight of cathedral finances and financial transactions. The Charity Commission does not regulate many activities which are currently regulated by the Church Commissioners. Therefore, if the draft measure only provided for cathedrals to be brought within the jurisdiction of the Charity Commission, much of the regulation and scrutiny of cathedrals' significant financial transaction would be lost. Therefore, the draft measure provides for the Church Commissioners to co-regulate various aspects of cathedral activity with the Charity Commission. This means that the Charity Commission would be the registrar and regulator of the cathedrals so far as they are charities in accordance with the framework set out in the Charities Act 2011. However, the Church Commissioners would regulate a number of cathedral activities that are not regulated by charity law or the Charity Commission. The regulatory powers conferred by the Church Commissioners in the draft measure are summarised in the annex to the explanatory notes. The Church Commissioners have approved the proposals for cathedrals to be co-regulated by the Church Commissioners and the Charity Commission. In principle, the Charity Commission's board accepts that it would be appropriate to remove what is in effect an anomaly that excludes cathedrals from the definition of charity in the Charities Act 2011. However, it has highlighted a number of areas where it has important concerns that it expects to be addressed to its satisfaction before the proposals can be implemented. The Third Church Estates Commissioner and members of the staff are working closely with the Charity Commission in order to fully address those concerns. And so to conclude, as you can see, a vast amount of work has already gone into this draft measure and the supporting consultations and the background activity. And I'd like to pay tribute to the Third Church Estates Commissioner, the legal officers and other staff for their hard work. There are no doubt improvements and refinements to the draft measure which members of Synod can offer, and in the hope that Synod is content that the draft measure proceeds to revision, I'd encourage members to submit them to the clerk so they can be considered by the revision committee. We're aware the timescale is tight, and if we are to bring revised legislation to the February 2020 Synod, but please feed in specific thoughts and those on direction of travel early that can be clarified as we progress. The steering and revision committees need to have the widest view of any concerns so that we can address them. I very much look forward to hearing what members have to say in the debate. Madam Chair, I move that the measure entitled Cathedral Measures be considered for revision in committee. Thank you.
As we come to debate item 508, I would like to stress that the matter before us is for first consideration. And so please remember, members, that under Standing Order 51, speeches must be directed to the general purport of the measure rather than to points of detail. As Robert has already pointed out, there will be the opportunity for members' feedback in terms of dealing with the detail and amendments they would like to be considered during the next stage of the process, which will be the revision stage. Also, I would like to remind members of the need for members to declare any relevant interest if called to speak. Thank you for that. It would be good to hear from as many people as possible, so please be aware that there will be a 3-minute speech limit from the outset. The motion at item 508 is now open for debate. I call upon Viv Faull to speak, followed by Andrew Nunn. Thank you.
Viv Faull, 3rd Church Estates Commissioner, 459. Thank you for calling. Since the debate last year, I've had the great good fortune to lead the implementation of the Cathedral's Working Group report, the first fruits of which is the draft measure before you. You also have before you GS MISC 1223, which accompanies it. This provides additional theological backbone to the proposals now enshrined in the measure. As preparation for our theological consultation, I was advised to read the Rule of St. Benedict and Botchster Towers. I hope you feel that this measure treads a delicate balance between these extremes. As you'll see from the consultation report, it was a rich discussion at St. George's House. And as the planes flew over the Royal Standard at Windsor, several ducks came into land on the wall outside the Vicar's Hall where the consultation was taking place. As they balanced on the parapet, jockeying for position, inside we also sought alignment, getting our ducks in a row about cathedral governance. At one point, we found ourselves reflecting on the role of the cathedral as the first church of the diocese, the original resource church, embodying and role modelling all that is best in church life as a showcase for both church and society. And while in many ways cathedrals already do this well, we concluded that not to role model excellence in governance, as well as in liturgy, music, mission and architecture, was to miss an opportunity. And while there may be clauses within this draft measure that are not quite there yet, we concluded that there can be no theological justification for cathedrals to be the only ecclesiastical bodies in this established church that do not make themselves accountable to the state through the Charity Commission. The Cathedral Support Group, which I chair, has been hard at work in the cathedral community since you asked us to bring this draft measure back to you. We're confident now that we know where there is broad agreement and where there is clear disagreement over what it contains. I'm grateful to Canon Robert Hammond for chairing the steering committee for this measure, and I hope you'll join us both in voting to commit this measure to revision stage so we can start the detailed work of reviewing all the suggested changes to bring a measure that enjoys wholehearted support back to you next year. Thank you.
Thank you. After Andrew Nunn, Tim Fleming, please. Thank you.
Andrew Nunn, Deans 55. Those of you with long memories may remember that last year when I stood here, I was a little bit grumpy about this report. I can report to you now that a year later I feel rather different, and that's a lot of that is due to the fact that we've had some very, very good process of consultation, and I also want to thank Viv Faull and the team for what they've given into that process. I'm delighted that I've been appointed as the chair of the revision committee if Synod passes this motion today. And in the short time that I have, I just want to raise some of the areas where I think we need to be doing some work. But if you don't feel that yet your voice has been heard, obviously this is an opportunity now, but we are desperate to hear every kind of opinion that there is, because cathedrals are a concern to all of us. Synod, the measure that is before us is by right based on the paper of the Cathedrals Working Group as passed by this Synod last year. And so it'll be our task to look and listen to the areas that may need amending. There are 42 cathedrals and 42 ways of being a cathedral. So we'll need to allow flexibility and that local expression of what it means to be a cathedral, which has allowed us to flourish and change and grow over the centuries that we've been in existence. At the same time, there are some serious areas of concern that we have. So, and unsurprisingly, we'll need to look at the role and the appointment of the Vice Chair, at the place of cathedral councils, and the proposal that bishops attend chapter whilst retaining visitation rights. How would that function? We'll need to think carefully about the demands placed on non-executive members of chapter and how this works in smaller and less well-resourced foundations. And while supporting the future role of the Charity Commission, we need to look carefully at how that'll work and how the trustee role will work as a whole. These are just some of the areas that I think we'll be needing to address. I believe that none of this is insurmountable, and overall the measure will help us to achieve the sound governance that we all want for our cathedrals. I therefore encourage you, members of Synod, to vote for the motion and to remind you again that the closing date for amendments to the Revision Committee is 5:30 p.m, not a minute later, on the 9th of August. So if you're on the beach, please do send us your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. After Tim Fleming, James Allison, please. Thank you.
Tim Fleming, St Albans 396. Thank you, Chair, for calling me. Good accountability and good governance is one of the tests of how organisations tick. It's one of the ways by which organisations are seen and viewed by the outside world. Can they be trusted? Are they worth investing in? Are they responsible? Do I want to be part of them? In my role as Head of Finance and Development at St Albans Cathedral, I guess there's an interested Claire, good accountability and good governance across all cathedrals is part of who we are, not for the sake of it, but because cathedrals and the church want to thrive. At report stage, I talked about being proud that when we hold the mirror up to our cathedrals, what we see in them is a reflection of inspiration, something of deep mission, something of grace. This measure does much to secure and sustain the reflection I hope we all wish for. A single body of accountability in chapter, clear purposes of what cathedrals are for, and robust structures and accountable committees. But as well as good structural governance, we need to keep relational governance at the heart of this measure, ensuring we have the right skills at the right time in chapters. and ensuring we maintain an appropriate balance between bishop, dean, congregation and diocese. And I'd like, if I may, to offer up 3 potential principles for the revision stage, and those are clarity, context and culture. Clarity to avoid misunderstandings and to ensure people are secure in knowing what they're doing and why and how they relate to others. Bishops being entitled to attend chapters as proposed but then not attending really isn't good governance for both parties. And phrases such as keeping under review the activities of the cathedral in the finance section do need a little bit of unpacking. Context. We know all cathedrals are different, yet all are similar. And of course, they change over time. I feel sections of the measure perhaps remain overly prescripted, and at revision I really do encourage us to look at that. Areas around financial expertise perhaps being too narrowly defined, and elections of only a third of lay non-executive members need unpacking. Culture. We really, I hope, must make sure this measure is grounded in the daily life of cathedrals, the here and now, the sense of place, the worshipping community, the building's real living stones. Viv Faull has mentioned the theology of cathedral governance. I feel it's a must-read for chapters, and it's perhaps through this that the revision of this measure should be located. And I was struck within that excellent report of the framing of governance as care, because care is perhaps at the heart of good governance. Care is at the heart of the church, and care often means recognising things aren't binary. So let us give this measure a fair wind, but let's improve it at revision, and let's be proud when we hold up the mirror. Thank you.
Thank you. After James Allison, the Bishop of Exeter, please. Robert Atwell, thank you.
Canon James Allison, 132 Leeds. I'm on the chapter of Wakefield Cathedral, representing the College of Canons, and as such, I am on the edge of cathedral life. I don't worship there very often, but I am at the heart of the governance of the cathedral, and that puts me in a very interesting place. As the former Dean of Wakefield said to me, you're not like us, which is why we need you to be on the chapter. Last September, I was surprised to be invited as a member of chapter to be at the first national meeting of cathedrals, which apparently was the first time we'd met for 500 years, which seemed a bit extraordinary, but we were in Manchester, and it was pretty impressive, and what that translates to is I was pretty intimidated by the whole thing, really. And at the beginning, as often with these things, there was a lovely welcome and a video from the Archbishop of Canterbury, who told us what a great responsibility we had, and, to be honest, said the usual things that they say at meetings. But at the end, there was this moment when, wonderfully, he sort of visibly relaxed, smiled and said, but it has to be fun, doesn't it? The cathedral life has to be fun. And if you can't have fun in a cathedral, you're not doing it properly. And it's about that fun that I want to bring to attention as we revise these wonderful documents, because I think the fun needs to be there, and it needs to have good legislation which creates boundaries but doesn't destroy the entrepreneurial nature of the work that cathedrals do. It's really important, I think, that cathedrals can be beacons to people like me in parishes, that they can quite frankly try things that we wouldn't dream of doing, that we can look at and say we will never do, but at least someone's had a go. And I think that needs for good governance. Because experimentation can lead to growth, but it can also lead to disaster. I want to give you one sense of how unusual cathedrals can be. Wakefield Cathedral over the last 3 years has had 300 adult baptisms. 300 adult baptisms, because it found itself at the heart of a way station for refugees coming into this country, and has worked with them in a most creative way, including doing nurture groups sat on the grass outside the cathedral in the middle of the precinct. And their morning congregation is full of young men, which is surprising, and in any cathedral really, but it's full of them, and they hang around wanting to talk about God, wanting to talk about life, and the cathedral staff are able to respond to that. So I sit in chapter looking around. I was there the other day, and I was looking around and thinking, there's Dean Simon at the front, captain of our ship. But then I suddenly thought, what kind of ship is it? Well, I want to suggest to you that we are pirates. Seriously, we are pirates, but not buccaneers. Those were the pirates who went off and got cash for themselves. We should be privateers. They were the likes of Drake, who went off and discovered lots of places for Queen Elizabeth by being those kind of people who, under orders, were able to do extraordinary things. So I commend this to you and suggest that we need a bit of safe piracy as part of the legislation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. After Robert Atwell, Caroline Spellman, please. Thank you.
Robert Atwell, 18, Exeter. Like many others, I'm really grateful to the Legal Office for their hard work in turning the many recommendations of the Cathedral's working group into draft legislation, and I welcome it and I'm supporting it. But there are just two areas that I think probably need a bit further thought. As Bishop of one of the cathedrals that is regularly cited as giving rise to the project, I'd like to focus the section of the report that speaks about the bishop's engagement with chapter. The draft cathedrals measure, it's paragraph 7.3, tells us that the bishop's entitled to attend meetings of chapter and must attend at least one of its meetings each year, and at any meeting that the bishop attends, the bishop may speak but not vote. And it sounds attractive and collaborative, but I question the wisdom of the provision. The bishop shall not have the right to vote. The very presence of the bishop could influence the decisions of chapter. Now, you may think that's a really good thing, except if things go wrong, then the bishop can be held at least partially responsible. And even if not present, but has the right to be, the bishop can then be accused of partial responsibility by neglect. I'm concerned that the very presence of the bishop at meetings of chapter could compromise the bishop's role as visitor. And if I think of the situation in Exeter 3 years ago, I'm not convinced that my attendance at chapter meetings would have avoided the deterioration of relationships, but it would have impacted on my role as visitor to resolve matters. It's the chapter's responsibility to govern a cathedral, not the bishop's. And this distinction, I think, needs to remain. And as this measure proceeds to revision, I really would hope that this particular provision would not muddy the waters. I suggest that the legislation requires the bishop to meet chapter annually at the chapter's invitation, but outside a formal chapter meeting, and not give the right and therefore the consequent duty of regular attendance at chapter. And secondly, just a thought about the role of the bishop as visitor, because you can't legislate for good relationships. And regrettably, sometimes, one hopes rarely, visitations are necessary. In my own case, the last visitation at Exeter was in 1965, over 50 years earlier. And it would greatly have helped me if there had been some sort of protocol for a visitation rather than a blank sheet of paper. Some sort of good code of practice would have provided a framework, both for my visitation team and also given reassurance to the cathedral community. It would have helped manage people's expectations and reduce levels of anxiety. I'd also ask the legal office to give consideration to what the bishop does in the event of a visitation. I'm content for the abolition of cathedral councils, but in their absence, to whom does a bishop make the chapter accountable for monitoring and implementing the bishop's charge? So I think there's still work to do, but I gladly support this measure.
Thank you. After Caroline Spellman, Carl Hughes, please. You have up to 3 minutes, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for calling me. Caroline Spellman, 458, Second Church Estates Commissioner. I'm here to show my solidarity with the Third Commissioner with whom I work closely. Cathedrals and churches are some of the only buildings in our country where the public feel a great relationship with a building. You'll often hear the local communities refer to these buildings as our cathedral and our church. They're convening spaces for the wider community so it can gather for celebration or mourning and are pillars of local identity and civic pride. Cathedrals are where the drama of religious, public and civic life play out together. They remain our most visited buildings with over 10 million visitors a year, and the congregations at the cathedrals are increasing, for which the deans and chapters should to be congratulated. These buildings are our showroom to the nation, and they demonstrate what the Church does best, contributing vastly to the local economy and employing over 7,300 people directly and indirectly. So as we set forth in these ships of faith, I'm quite captured by the idea of piracy, to reach the shores of heaven, it is essential that these assets are stewarded well. Now, I'm sure you're aware the Church of England is already accountable to Parliament through my office for all our activity, domestic and international. Church Commissioners, the Pension Board, Archbishop's Council, PCCs, diocesan boards of finance are all accountable to Charity Commission. So it's surprising, really, that cathedrals remain one of the only groups of charitable organisations in this country which have no independent regulator. As a church, we're in receipt of substantial support from the Treasury through grants, the Heritage Lottery Fund, gift aid, VAT relief, and all of these are open to listed buildings. But the days of receiving money without questions and accountability are gone. We have to accept a greater level of transparency and accountability than we've previously been used to. And if, as Second Church Estates Commissioner, I'm to go to the Treasury on behalf of cathedrals and churches, or stand up in Parliament and defend government granting the church money, such as the World War I Cathedral Repair Fund, then greater transparency is essential, and it's increasingly expected at every level. These proposals, Synod, help set out this transparency, good governance, clear management structures, and independent regulation. They will help support the mission and ministry of cathedrals, and I'm pleased to say, Synod, that following my meeting with the College of Deans last month, they passed a motion which indicated unanimous support for this measure in principle. So, Synod, I commend the measure to you, and I thank the Third Commissioner and her team for their extensive work on our behalf.
After Carl Hughes, Patricia Hawkins, please.
Carl Hughes, Southwark 413. Madam Chair, thank you very much indeed for calling me. 3 years ago, in July 2016, having completed a series of preliminary inquiries at Peterborough Cathedral on behalf of Bishop Donald here at the front, it became apparent to me that the cathedral was indeed in significant financial difficulty, that governance had broken down, and that key operational and financial controls were absent. After the ensuing visitation, which I led on behalf of the Bishop, Bishop Donald in his charge urged that the cathedral's measure 1999 be reviewed, and the results of the ensuing work of the cathedral's working group on which I served are before us today. And at the outset, I would like to make it very clear to Synod that, in my opinion, had the draft measure that we have before us today been in place in 2016, the situation at Peterborough would have been significantly less likely to have arisen. The cathedral's measure is a masterful translation of the CWG report into legislation, and I really do congratulate the legal office for their skillful work over recent months. Much of what we had in our report does not require legislation and is being addressed through guidance notes and the sharing of best practice. However, what the cathedral's measure does do is set out frameworks within which cathedral communities will operate. Most importantly, bringing cathedrals under a regulatory umbrella for the first time. Secondly, clarifying the role of the bishop, beyond being simply visitor to engaging with chapter, and also appointing a trustee, independent of the cathedral, whether clerical or lay, to serve as vice chair, or as I personally would prefer, to actually be the senior independent trustee, whether vice chair or not. And thirdly, clearly separating governance and management, with the chapter being the trustee body, as well as the praying heart of the cathedral, and the senior executive team managing day-to-day operations. Overall, understanding this separation of governance and management roles, for me, is fundamental to the understanding of the measure, and in my view, to the safe and effective running of our cathedrals in the future. The draft measure also affords considerable flexibility in implementation to ensure that this is not a one-size-fits-all measure. In closing, I would like to offer one word of caution. The Howe Commission published its well-researched and insightful report into the work of cathedrals in 1994, and its recommendations in many ways were not dissimilar to those of the CWG. However, in implementing those recommendations in the late 1990s, Synod chose to cherry-pick and substantially revise the draft legislation, which became the Cathedrals Measure 1999, a measure which has proved not to be fit for purpose. I thus urge members of Synod to avoid making the same mistake again during the revision stage. And obviously, I urge Synod to support this motion, that the draft measure be passed on at the revision stage.
After Patricia, Hawkins and Foreman, please. Thank you.
Hawkins, Lichfield 144, thank you for calling me. I speak as a residentiary canon and therefore as a member of Lichfield Cathedral Chapter. When I went back to my room after a fun evening at the quiz on Saturday night, I discovered that the battery of my keypad had ceased to work and I therefore could not get in. Last night, I couldn't even get into the block and on inquiring was advised that I'd checked out on Saturday morning. I look forward with some trepidation to getting into my new room tonight. There is nothing like feeling that your presence is welcomed and appreciated. I have found it a difficult year to be a residentiary canon in relation to this measure. The details of that do not need rehearsing again, but I would make the general point that all significant changes involve people, and that therefore how those people are involved in the process of change should be among the key considerations. Having said that, I shall be voting for this measure to continue to revision stage. A debt of gratitude is owed to the Third Estates Commissioner and her team for all the work that has been done this year. It has still felt somewhat top-down, but that is being addressed. I found the Fringe meeting last night both informative and reassuring. Last week, members of our chapter met at my request to discuss the draft measure. A number of significant questions have been raised, among them the proposed vice-chair and the rights and responsibilities of the bishop in relation to chapter, conflicts of interest, issues of the proposed joint regulation and how this might work in practice. These will need to be addressed with other issues at the revision stage. However, no one is querying the principles of good governance and robust financial management, regulation and scrutiny. Indeed, Lichfield has already put into place a number of recommendations which do not require any legislative change. In the same way as a residentiary, I not only do not resist the principle that I should be accountable for my ministry with clearly defined responsibilities, I welcome it. As we are all too well aware, there is no place for unaccountable ministry in the 21st century church. But I do think that we need to explore, pay careful attention to when issues of accountability and responsibility slip over into issues of power and control. We are not good at dealing with power struggles in the church because on the whole, we don't name them. In conclusion, there is much work to be done at revision stage in order to make sure that a piece of work that was done under great time pressure in response to a specific crisis is fit for purpose in relation to the broader complex issues it seeks to address. However, as I began by saying, much work has been done over this past year, and I would urge Synod to vote for this measure to pass to the revision stage.
Thank you. After Anne, Rogers Govender, please. Thank you.
Anne Foreman, Exeter 308. Thank you for calling me. And may I first of all express my appreciation to the Third Estates Commissioner for, it wasn't just that we got good papers, but it was the tone, the positive and optimistic tone of them. So thank you very much. I'm a member of Exeter Cathedral Council, and I also am on the council of the Friends of Exeter Cathedral. All cathedrals need good friends because they matter, as Canon Hammond said. I just want to make a couple of observations, please, about the cathedral councils, and it's not a bid for them to be reinstated. I quite accept that they are going to be abolished. It seems a bit of a shame, though, I think, as a member of an active cathedral council, that because several or many cathedral councils didn't make full use of the powers, limited though they were, that they had, that they should be abolished altogether. I appreciate that there will be the opportunity for new councils and committees to be made, but they will be outside the body corporate and will have no particular authority at all. So what I would like the revision committee to consider is how the function that the cathedral councils have at the moment to be a critical friend to the chapter can be included, because I appreciate that they're going to be a good number of lay executive, non-executive members of the chapter, but how are they going to be that critical friend? Because cathedral councils at the moment are independent. They meet independently. Some of them are elected from the praying communities associated with the cathedral. So my request is that the revision committee takes seriously how they can encourage non-executive members to be a true critical friend to the chapter. Thank you.
After Rogers Govender, Sarah Tupling.
Rogers Govender, Deans 058. In broadly welcoming the report, could I say that we, in the cathedrals world, many of our cathedrals, if not all of our cathedrals, have already implemented a number of the recommendations in terms of management and the like. So it's important that Synod is aware of that, firstly. The second thing I want to say is that there have been a few occasions when my bishop has received one or two complaints about things that I've allowed in my cathedral. But with the bishop not being a member of the chapter, it enables the bishop to give his response and also give to me and the chapter an opportunity to respond independently on the similar complaints. I've had a similar occasion when I agreed to give permission to fly the rainbow flag on the tower of the cathedral when somebody complained to the Archbishop of Canterbury's office about what was the Archbishop going to do about the flying of this flag in Manchester. And I think the Archbishop gave a good response. And he read something like this: what the Dean of Manchester decides to fly on the tower of his cathedral is entirely his business. And that enabled me to respond to the person who complained. The third thing that I want to just bring to our attention, and that is to really emphasize the importance of cathedral councils. I'm personally in favour of retaining cathedral councils simply because most, if not all, of our cathedrals operate in a very secular environment. And the cathedral council membership often enables us to attract people from the city, from business, from community groups, and the life of the diocese as well as the cathedral community to work together, to sit together and engage with us and challenge us in our own understanding of our outreach to the city and to the county. And the Cathedral Council membership enables that to happen. So I really would plead for that to be retained when this measure goes to the revision committee. Thank you very much.
After Sarah Tupling, Viv Faull, the Bishop of Bristol, please. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Sarah Tupling. My number is 471, and I'm one of the three deaf Anglican togethers sitting over the front over there. Thank you for calling me. There's been quite a few issues raised about the draft cathedral measure, and some of those thoughts have been new to me, and others of them have been other things that have been interesting. But I was really taken by the idea that 10 million people are visiting our cathedrals, and I wonder how many of them might be deaf or deafened or blind or other disabilities. And I know we're always talking about access, but it's not just us. It's refugees, or it's anybody that's coming who speaks another language to English. And of course, they might want to speak to people in English, but what about how they might understand other things that are in the church, in the cathedral? There's lots of people that are coming from abroad, Poland, Latvia, whatever. Even yesterday, I was talking to a family from Hong Kong who were visiting, and we were just outside the York Minster. And I found myself gesturing and trying to communicate with them, and consequently we were able to have a conversation. But the point I want to raise, and in particular I'd like to mention this to the chair of the revision committee, Andrew Nunn, I think, if that's correct from memory, I hope so. I'd just like to ask you to take note and be aware in your process of providing access for, well, allowing all cathedrals to make it mandatory, actually. That's my position. I want to say be considerate of it, but actually what I want to say really is make it mandatory so that all cathedrals are accessible, so that if there is any video footage put up in one of the cathedrals, that it has to be subtitled. It may even want to have a BSL in vision interpreter. But if we could have these details put into the measure, then perhaps that's something that will get things right from the beginning. And Andrew, I hope that you'll remember that and you'll have Sarah on your shoulder as you're writing these revisions. Thank you so much.
After Viv Faull, Neil Patterson, please. Thank you.
Viv Faull, 009, Bishop of Bristol, member of the steering group for the legislation. And I support what has been said in terms of thanks to Viv Faull and those working with her who have moved so swiftly and so ably to enable us to have the documents that we have today. There is much to be done at drafting stage, and therefore I also support what has been said by many in terms of your preparedness to submit proposals and amendments. I'm particularly concerned about what has happened because we have removed the councils from close governance of the cathedral, from the body corporate. But we haven't found a solution to that. The problems are, as I see them, that we no longer have the proper place for the voice of the bishop, and I endorse all that the Bishop of Exeter has said. And I think we have in clause 7, subsection 4, something that's frankly rather bizarre in terms of relationship and ecclesiology, when a chapter is invited to vote by 3/4 to exclude the bishop from conversation. That indicates to me that we haven't got the solution right. We need to find a better solution for the voice of the bishop. And that voice was properly held in the council. And the second loss that we have is the voice of senior lay people. I have benefited enormously over the years in Leicester as well as York from the wise counsel of the chairs of cathedral councils. And I don't think it is equivalent making those that person a part of the cathedral chapter, which is, I think, what we thought we were doing in the cathedral's working group. So there is more work to be done there. And while you are lying on your beaches, I wonder if you can help us with this, because there is a wisdom in crowds, and you may be able to crack this in ways that the cathedral working group couldn't. And I think this measure hasn't quite achieved. Secondly, I am concerned about building good relationships with the Charity Commission. I've been involved in this work of negotiating the Charity Commission for over 10 years. When we first met with staff from the Charity Commission, the first question to me, as then chair of the AEC, was, are your foundation documents, in other words, your constitution and statutes, in English? It was a peculiar question, I thought, until I realised that the Charity Commission staff were then handling the oversight of Oxbridge colleges, many of which, it seemed, were producing scrolls in Latin and medieval French. It is evidence of change in cathedrals that we now have English foundation documents, but there is still work to be done in terms of creating good relationships and confidence in the Charity Commission, which is itself feeling under pressure, not least reputationally after issues in Oxfam. So please, brothers and sisters, if you are involved in the governance of cathedrals, if you are part of a cathedral community, please, you don't need to wait for legislation for this. Make sure that your safeguarding is properly ensured. Make sure that your financial provisions and accountability is properly in place. That will help those of us seeking to build confidence in the Charity Commission. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. After Neil Patterson, Alison Coulter, please. Thank you.
Neil Patterson, Hereford 128. Thank you for calling me. Members of Synod may recall that last year I had the satisfaction of standing here and proposing to you a one-word amendment, July for February, postponing first consideration of this measure until now, and you almost all liked it. And so I begin with praise and thanks, as many others have, for Eve and her team and all those who have been involved in the consultations. We have resources of high value, a good draft measure, an excellent paper on the theology of cathedral governance. These things are not, of course, perfect. I was somewhat disquieted at breakfast yesterday to hear, I'm sorry to say, one of the cathedral support team say that they didn't have enough information to consult directly with all members of chapters. That puzzled me. And no doubt there's going to be a hefty bundle of amendments landing in the inboxes of the revision committee, and probably some more that don't make it through there that will come back to us in February, and the 40-member rule will apply, and we'll have great fun with that. And because of that, I want to address us to that likelihood of the many, many amendments. We don't have a one-page measure. It's quite a thick little bundle of paper, but it is comparatively simple, given what complex beasts cathedrals are. It has been drafted in a way that is permissive, that is enabling for our varied cathedrals to draw up constitutions which reflect their varied natures and contexts. And so my plea to Synod is this. There will, quite reasonably, be revisions to make. But let us try to resist the temptation to mangle this legislation, as perhaps we did in 1999, by riding our favourite hobby horses all over it. We all know the perils of micromanagement. It's a character in people that I look for in discernment work, because it can, in any sort of ministry, cause all sorts of pain. We all know that potentially it can be somewhat purgatorial for a cathedral to be micromanaged by an interfering bishop or a domineering dean. There are very few of them around now. But if it were to be, it would be hell to be micromanaged by Synod over-legislating. I can see that the clock is ticking. So what I say in summary is, we cannot legislate for good relationships. We cannot compel people to love one another and work together in Christian charity. But we do have the ability also to resource it in other ways. Alongside the legislation, there will be a raft of good practice guidance, and I admit I now belatedly declare my interest, there will be a process of peer review, a panel to which I, among others, have been appointed. Pass the legislation strongly into revision, don't make too much of a dog's dinner of it, and let all those carry on working to make our cathedrals the most shining flagships of the spirit they can be in our land. Thank you.
Thank you. After Alison Coulter, Muriel Robinson, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for calling me. Alison Coulter, Winchester 425. I'd like to speak about my own cathedral, our own cathedral. Winchester Cathedral. I'm not going to sing anymore because it's not getting me down. It's a source of amazing encouragement to me. But I do want to share with you some thoughts on this measure which have been shaped by a very helpful conversation that we had with the Dean and Chapter at their invitation to us as elected Synod reps. I happen to think that we have one of the finest cathedrals in the country, but I'm sure all of you think that too. I'd like to make 3 points I'm learning from some of you here. The first is, has already been expressed by many people, that legislation doesn't make good relationships. And in my experience in the workplace and in life, organisations work well when relationships work well. What makes good relationships? Well, Paul writes in many of his letters to us about this. We need love, patience, kindness, goodness, self-control. I'm not a lawyer, but it would be wonderful to see some of these things in the legislation. Timothy Fleming talked about a framework for culture. If we could think a little bit about how cathedrals can work as well as what they do, that would be very helpful. Secondly, I'm sitting very near my bishop. I've just realised that. The relationship between the dean and the bishop obviously needs to be a good one, and I'm very glad that ours is. But there are other relationships too which I think need to be good, and I would find it very helpful as lay chair of Diocesan Synod if there could be a little bit more mention of diocese and diocesan synod in the legislation. For example, in the very first point, it talks about the cathedral being a centre of worship and mission for the diocese, for the people of the diocese. And thirdly, money. There's another song about money. You'll be glad I'm not going to sing that. But one thing that has worked well in Winchester is that our Receiver General has been a full part as a lay member of Synod, and this will change under this legislation. So I'd just like to ask if a little bit more thought could be given to the governance model that we want to use. In business, we have executive and non-executive members. In charities, there are trustees who are independent. And I think we might have some of Nikki's fudge here, because we do have here ordained members of chapter residentiary canons, but our own lay Receiver General would be excluded. So I'd just like if a little bit more thought could be given to the governance model to make sure we're not getting into clericalism, which we spoke about yesterday, where there's one rule for the laity and another for the clergy. But overall, in Winchester, we're very positive about this measure, and thank very much Eve and her team for all their work. Thank you very much.
After Muriel Robinson, Peter Neville Collier, please. Thank you.
Muriel Robinson, Lincoln 343. Chair, thank you for calling me to speak. I speak as a lay canon of Lincoln Cathedral, but mainly as a member of the regular congregation. Greetings from Lincoln Cathedral. Thank you, Synod members, for all your concern. We are in good heart, but we would appreciate your prayers continuing. I'd like to congratulate the Third Estates Commissioner and the team on this draft measure. which offers a good degree of legislative control, but at the same time a clear sense that cathedrals are different and scope within sensible regulation to adapt to local need. I was particularly reassured as a member of the worshipping community by the ecclesiastical purpose in Clause 1 and by references later which emphasised the duty of care to the congregation in all cathedrals, whether they are parish churches or not. I do have some suggestions as to how that could be strengthened, which I will submit to the revision committee. I would also welcome a development of that duty of care within the non-statutory guidance, which I believe is being developed. Another remaining concern, though, as a lay person, is about the way in which the lay vice-chair is to be appointed. I can see the value of the bishop having the right to appoint a lay non-executive member, but I think maybe more consideration needs to be given as to whether that person should be vice-chair and about how we can make the appointment of that person more transparent, perhaps by the involvement of diocesan trustees. Overall, though, I would suggest that this is a really good draft, well ready for progression to the revision committee. I shall be voting to support it, and I hope that the rest of you will too. Thank you.
Thank you. After Peter has spoken, I will be proposing a motion for closure on the debate. Thank you.
Peter Collier, 456, Vicar General, York. Madam Chair, thank you for calling me. I declare an interest in that I'm chair of the Cathedral Council at York Minster. And last July, I spoke in the debate on this matter and expressed my concern that the working group had proposed the abolition of cathedral councils, and something echoed today. But I'm delighted that the draft legislation enables cathedrals to provide for themselves advisory councils if they so wish. My concern this year is that the measure as drafted provides that that body would be a committee or subcommittee of the chapter and that the chair must be a member of chapter. This was not recommended by the working group and I don't understand any rationale being advanced for it. Currently, councils are part of the body corporate of the cathedral. The loss of that would not, in my judgment at any rate, be any real loss to the council, because the council, through their independent chair, are seen as being separate from chapter and so able to fulfil what has in a number of cathedrals been a significant role as both critical friend of chapter and independent advocate for chapter. And it's that independence, particularly the independence from chapter of the chair, which gives the chair the ability to hear what members of chapter, members of staff, members of the wider public, and sometimes even a dean have to say when they feel the need to speak confidentially to someone about the cathedral. The current proposal will remove that visible independence and so take away the potential effectiveness of the council as that friend and advocate. And I hope the revision process will look closely at that with a view to ensuring the independence is maintained where the cathedral wishes to have such a body. Otherwise, I'm supportive of the general direction of travel which the measure provides. In York, we've already amended the constitution and statutes to provide that the number of non-exec and lay members of chapter will be more than the number comprising the dean and residentiaries. There's nothing to fear in that direction. I would encourage Synod to vote for this measure to move it forward to the revision process.
Thank you very much. Therefore, I now wish to test the mind of the Synod on whether item 508 has been sufficiently debated. I therefore put the motion for closure on item 508 to the vote. Those in favour for the motion for the closure of item 508, please show. Thank you. Those against this, please show. Thank you. That is carried. I ask, therefore, Robert Hammond to respond to the debate, please. You have up to 3 minutes. Thank you.
There's nothing like a challenge, is there? Robert Hammond, Chelmsford 273. Thank you, Synod, for that excellent debate and all those great contributions. I think everybody was broadly supportive, so thank you very much. Time doesn't, even 3 minutes, doesn't allow me to comment on every contribution, but just to pick out a couple of comments and themes. Andrew Nunn, I'm glad you're no longer grumpy No one likes grumpy deans. Everybody wants cathedrals to be fun, like James Allison. I think Archbishop Justin's quote was, "If you can't have fun in a cathedral, do you really know what fun is?" And that's why we've gone for... And that's why we've gone for light touch legislation supported by guidance. We heard how cathedrals are doing extraordinary things, showroom to the state, as Caroline Spellman put it, 10 million people visiting our cathedrals each year. The Bishop of Exeter, yes, clearly more work needs to be done on the relationship between bishops and chapter. Patricia Hawkins, yes, change management and impacts on people are vital, so implementation will have to be handled carefully. The Dean of Durham, I understand, is leading on some work there. And we're trying to create a structure which facilitates the creation of good relationships and allows them to flourish through this legislation. Dean of Manchester, Anne Foreman, Bishop of Bristol, Peter Collier, Cathedral Councils. Yes, love to receive your thoughts in revision on that. So again, thank you. No draft measure is perfect, but I hope you feel that we're starting to get our ducks in a row on this, and I hope Synod will vote in favour of this draft legislation. Your opportunity to feed back and submit proposals for amendment in revision committee is now. If you did speak today, or if you wanted to but didn't, then please write in by Friday the 9th of August with your comments or suggestions. If you have your best ideas while sunning yourself on exotic tropical holidays, on beaches, or even on pirate ships, or exploring great cathedrals here or abroad, then please capture those thoughts and send them in, ideally via email and in English. Scrolls and in ancient French aren't quite as useful to the revision committee. Thank you very much, Synod.
We move to voting on item 508. Would those in favour please show? Thank you. Would those against please show? Thank you. Item 508, everyone's obviously delighted with this, is carried. Thank you very much. Let me reiterate the point then that the draft cathedrals measure is now automatically committed to a revision committee as stated in the agenda. Any member who wishes to submit proposals for the amendment should send them in writing to the clerk to the Synod. These would need to arrive by 5:30 p.m. on Friday the 9th of August 2019. Thank you very much. That completes this item of business, so we will move to the next item on the agenda in a moment. Thank you, everyone.
Real meaty stuff.
Well done, Robert. Very good, very good. Very persuasive.
We now come to item 509 on the agenda, the Faculty Jurisdiction Amendment Rules. And for this, you will need Amendment Rules GS 2137 and the Explanatory Memorandum GS 2137X. And I invite the Chair of the Rule Committee to move item 509. He has up to 10 minutes.
Charles George, 454, Auditor in this province and Dean of the Arches. This is the 3rd July in 6 years that, as Chair of the Faculty Rule Committee, I've had the questionable pleasure of seeking Synod's approval of new faculty rules. I'm glad to report that the changes already made, including the online system and the new lists A and B, have bedded down well and been welcomed by parishes and DACs. So why the need for further amendments? Well, there are two main reasons. First, lists A and B came into force on the 1st of January 2016, and after 3.5 years, stock-taking is required to review their individual content. Extensive consultation has been carried out by the Church Building Council, to which a large number of responses were made, primarily from DACs, but also from bodies such as Historic England and from individuals, including several chancellors and at least one member of General Synod. The Rule Committee also had the opportunity to review the various additional matters orders made by individual chancellors with a view to including some of these matters into lists A and B. Second, the procedures of the faculty system themselves warranted review in the light of practical experience of its operation. Some of the consultation responses included suggestions for changes to achieve a more efficient system. The task has not been an easy one, hence the need for no fewer than 5 sittings of the Rule Committee, and I'm extremely grateful to the hard-working members of that committee, 2 highly pragmatic lay members of General Synod with considerable experience at parish level, a diocesan bishop and an archdeacon, registrars and chancellors, a DAC chairman and secretary, a diocesan secretary, and a member of the CBC with particular experience of the statutory amenity societies. It was a huge sadness that before our work had been completed, the death occurred of one of our members, Caroline Mockford, the provincial registrar of the Northern Province. I also pay tribute to our legal secretary sitting behind me, whose assistance and drafting have been, as on previous occasions, exemplary. He's now deservedly moved to an even more prestigious and demanding position for which he's uniquely well qualified. In the time available to me, I can only highlight the principal changes. In the case of lists A and B, a version with track changes is provided in GS 2137X, and a flow chart is available on the Church Care website. In addition to various relatively small changes to the wording of the rules and the prescribed forms made in the interests of clarity and simplification, there are 3 significant procedural changes. First, a substantial revision of Part 4 of the rules. We propose, in line with the recommendation of Historic England and Chancellor Petche, to front-load the procedure so as best to assist parishes by ensuring that all relevant materials have been considered by the DAC before it issues its formal advice to the Chancellor. The DAC will have a new power to issue an initial advice to parishes, informing them of what additional materials the DAC requires to be able to formulate its final advice. We're leaving it to individual DACs to work up their own procedures to accommodate this overall change. The result should be to reduce the time between formal commencement of faculty proceedings, that is after the DAC's final advice has been issued, and the Chancellor's decision. Second, when the petition for faculty is lodged, usually nowadays on the online system, The documents which currently have to be available for inspection at the church will be available for inspection online. This is a matter for which the CBC has been pressing in the interests of transparency and fairness for some while. Third, at the present time, any objector who becomes a party opponent can require the holding of an oral hearing. In future, the decision whether the matter is dealt with by written representations or an oral hearing will be one for the Chancellor, and the same position will apply in the appellate court if permission to appeal is granted. It's not merely where objections are considered unmeritorious or vexatious that an oral hearing may be refused. There may be other cases where, in all the circumstances, the Chancellor considers that there's no need to hear oral evidence to reach an informed determination. And this change simply brings the faculty system into line with the way in which decisions between written representations and oral hearings are made in other jurisdictions. Let me turn then to lists A and B, the really exciting bit. The aim has been to add to the items in list A where this can reasonably be done, including moving to list A some matters previously in list B, such as installation of roof alarms and of safes in vestries, replacement of boilers and replacement of gas and oil tanks. Sometimes in lists A and B, we've distinguished between listed and non-listed buildings. For example, in relation to like-for-like replacement of roofing materials, the treatment of timber against beetle or fungal activity, installation of defibrillators in churches and churchyards. On the other hand, an early decision of the Rule Committee was not to transfer all or even the vast majority of changes to an unlisted building to List A. That was considered to risk irreversible damage to buildings which, although not listed, warranted some controls. Just to give you one example of many, it's long been a grievance to parishes that new and replacement external notice boards didn't fall within either List A or B. That is now changed, and provision is made for different types of notice board in each of those lists. So far as List B, we've again sought to include additional matters, such as the introduction of candle stands, the refurbishment of facilities for serving refreshments, extensive additional work to clocks, and the provision of bicycle stands in churchyards. I need finally to make 4 points about lists A and B. First, and not recognised by a number of respondents to the consultation, there are numerous matters which by statute simply cannot be included in lists A and B. For example, works to monuments, whether in the church or the churchyard. Second, even if a matter is not in lists A and B, it may still be so minor that it can be done without a faculty. Where there's doubt on such matters, reference should be made to the Chancellor, as explained in the new introduction to lists A and B. Third, some relatively minor matters are best dealt with otherwise than through inclusion in lists A and B. An example would be preliminary works of excavation in a church or churchyard. Such matters are best dealt with by application to the Chancellor for an interim faculty, a swift procedure which can be conducted by email and ensures an appropriate degree of oversight. And fourth, there is no absolutely right answer to what should be in lists A or B. As I said, the Rule Committee had on it individuals with a very wide range of experience. We also had the invaluable help of our consultant David Knight from the CBC and the suggestions of consultees. And before these new rules come into operation, if they are approved by you, there will be considerable further guidance given to DACs and to archdeacons and to registrars and to chancellors on their working. I ask you, please, to accept these amendments.
Thank you. Item 509 is now open for debate, and there will be, from the outset, a speech limit of 3 minutes in view of the number of people who have an interest in wishing to speak. So I begin by calling upon Michael Gorick, and after him, Paul Ayres. Thank you. Martin Gorick.
Thank you for calling me, Chair, and by the proper name. Martin Gorick, Oxford 189. Have you ever played Cathedral Top Trumps? If so, and it is a genuine card game, much beloved of cathedral choirs, you will know that the cathedral with the highest spire is Salisbury. Well done. The longest nave, St Albans. And for greatest external length and all-round hugeness, Liverpool. Fantastic. City of my birth, city of the greatest football team in Europe, if not the world. However, Oxford loses on almost every count in cathedral top trumps, except one. The diocese has more parish churches than any other, with 819. Perhaps as a result, our DAC handles more faculty and List B applications than any other diocese, over 100 in the last month alone. I would like to salute the work of DACs, their officers and volunteer professionals who work tirelessly to help parishes find good ways forward as they care for and adapt their historic buildings. They can be much maligned, but they do an amazing job. Having consulted with our DAC and my fellow archdeacons, I'd like to commend the proposals put before us today and hope that you will vote in favour for their adoption. In Oxford, we already front-load the faculty process, as is suggested in Rule 4 here, so that amenity societies are consulted before a notice of advice is issued by the DAC, not afterwards. We've found this works very well, preventing lengthy and frustrating delays at later stages and helping those societies to play a more positive part in the process, should they so wish. We're also happy to approve the many changes to List A and List B that are proposed here. We have a concern about A1B, which allows work of repair, not material affecting the fabric or any historic material. We have some concern that parishes may be tempted, for example, to undertake unwise mortar repairs and repointing using materials that may not be the best and would prove costly to rectify in later years. The dressed stones or lithos that Isabel so ably told us about in 1 Peter 2 can soon be reduced to petros or rough stones by the wrong mortar. We'd like to suggest putting a clear guideline or condition to prevent this in the adjoining column, or if it's too late to do that, at least in the guidelines to parishes.
I'm afraid I'm conscious of time,
Thank you.
and
Yeah.
you are
Overall,
out
very
of time.
happy to support the proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you.
After Paul Ayres, I call upon Timothy Good.
Paul Ayres, Leeds 130. I share with Martin a broad welcome for the alterations here, but I do have some concerns, and I want to go through those briefly. I've listened to other archdeacons and also to DAC staff, although I can't claim to represent their views. Like Martin, I'm concerned about pointing. He's expressed that very well. Also in Rule 1, List A16, adaptation could mean total rewiring of a church. Do we really want that in List A? I'm concerned about 1.7, boilers. Very often, boilers that are proposed that come to us under List B or under faculty, our heating advisor says this is the wrong piece of equipment. It's not adequate to the task, you haven't done your heat loss calculations, and the contractor that you've got to do it doesn't understand how to do heat loss calculations. A bit concerned about in 120, what's the difference between adaptation and alteration to a sound system? Could this mean new speakers stuck up all over the place? In 5.9, new chairs could be like these here that we're sitting on now at the front. They could be any design at all. Just because a building is unlisted, it doesn't mean that any old thing will do. PCCs can still seek advice, but the problem is, when you're under List A, that those who most need the advice tend to be the ones that don't know that they need it, and so they don't ask. And it may be a long time before anyone finds out what they've done, and then it's too late. My second concern is about the extended period for amenity societies to respond from 28 days to 42 days. There are those who think that amenity societies already have too much influence without any responsibility. If they've been pushing at the 28-day deadline, does this risk that they'll be pushing at the new 42-day deadline as well, resulting in further delays? And there's also a little concern about the need for DACs to not to send notification or advice until all consultees' views are in. There's a slight concern that this may compromise the independence of DACs. Chancellors consult a number of bodies, and DACs need to be free to express their own views. Now, I could be completely wrong about all of these matters. The problem is that we've had very little time to reflect and consult and respond, because this is one-stage business. It's kind of take it or leave it. I'm sorry that I missed the deadline for amendments, although even the chair of the Business Committee has admitted to me that she also missed it. When the Dean of Southwark is lying on the beach, it's already going to be too late, as there is no revision stage. So I want to ask, what procedure will there be for looking at some of these matters and possibly revisiting them? Thank you.
Thank you. After Timothy Good, Sue Boys. Oh, I'm so sorry. Good. Would those who wish to contribute please stand? Julie Teagill. Okay.
Timothy Good, Southwark 221. I should declare an interest from the outset that I am a member of the DAC of the Southwark Diocese, and I've consulted with the Chair and Secretary of the Southwark DAC, and we fully support the intentions of making the system more efficient and effective. And there is much here that is welcomed and commended. And I'm sure any concerns that we have, we are confident will be addressed by the CBC when they provide appropriate written guidance. One particular concern, and it's been mentioned in passing already, is that the consultation process with statutory heritage bodies is being front-loaded with the intention that all consultations end up carried out before the DAC formally recommends a proposal, or not, as the case may be. This change to the consultation process potentially adds in more requirements at earlier stages of the faculty application process, but does not actually amend or reduce the rules existing requirements for public notice, website notice, and later consultations as directed by the Chancellor. In particular, do the changes actually address the commonly experienced issue of statutory heritage bodies simply not responding at all? For example, presently, if no reply is received when the statutory heritage body is consulted for a 42-day period, the said statutory heritage body must still be consulted again later on. Is the intention, therefore, that all consultations actually take place prior to the DAC stage of the application being completed may actually not be borne out by the draft legislation? It would be particularly helpful to get clarification on this particular point. But let me re-emphasise that the direction of travel for this legislation is truly welcomed, and especially the commitment to appropriate simplification. We look forward to the written guidance that I'm sure will accompany the amended faculty jurisdiction rules. Thank you.
After Julie Teagill and Autry. Thank you.
Julie Teagill, Oxford 377. I declare an interest as a member of the Rule Committee. As a deanery treasurer, it's my lot to justify the parish share quite often. And people often wish to challenge those nebulous central costs. I don't think there are any central costs that are unjustifiable in Oxford. And one of the things that I often speak about is the faculty jurisdiction and the DAC. At this point in the discussion, I'm quite used to people laughing. or getting a bit annoyed, they perceive the faculty system to be quite of a right royal pain in the behind. They say so. So I explain. The faculty system exempts our buildings from a lot, although not all, of planning permission requirements, and critically, all requirements for listed buildings consent. I have tales to tell about the horrors of listed buildings consent. Would anybody dare to ask me about it? But the faculty system enables us to avoid these horrors and puts the development of our buildings in our control so we can use them for our mission, which sadly we cannot expect the secular authorities to understand. It's a huge privilege. We must be thankful for it and use it wisely. Of course, we're treading a fine line in our use of this privilege. We cannot ignore the secular views of our buildings, many of which are of enormous historic interest. The privilege of the faculty system could be withdrawn. That is a continual possibility. And also, it would be counter-missional to ride roughshod over the concerns of the secular community, who we would so dearly love to engage with us and come to know the love of our Lord Jesus Christ. Which is why consultation with various amenity societies, including Historic England, is included in our rules. In this revision of the rules, our overriding objective has been to simplify the procedures and move as many things to List A or List B so they do not require faculty at all as possible. It's not been easy and views have differed and we've needed expert advice. I now know more about bells and glass and oil tanks than I ever thought I'd need to know. These rules contain a better process, one that front-loads consultations required so that when a faculty is succeeded, there's less toing and froing. And the grants for faculty is simpler, and the expansion of List A and B will mean fewer faculties need to be requested at all. Of course, the exemption from listed buildings consent is not hugely useful if your listed building isn't listed. For the first time, we've included items in List A and B that only apply if your building is not listed. Overall, I think these revised rules make the faculty system a little bit less of a pain in the behind. We must support them wholeheartedly, and I, for one, will continue to extol the virtues of the faculty jurisdiction and persuade others to thank God for it, as I do.
Thank you. After Anne Daughtry has spoken, I am minded to test the mind of Synod for a motion of closure on this item.
Anne Daughtry, Leeds 134. I speak as an Archdeacon and also as a member of the Rules Committee. I would like to commend these new rules to you as being very much in tune with the simplification agenda with which this Synod has been exercised during this quinquennium. The additional matters that can now be dealt with via List A or List B will, I believe, help to ease the administrative burdens on busy parish clergy and church wardens. There is also, in my view, a helpful distinction between permission needed for certain matters in an unlisted church as opposed to the permission needed for the same works in a listed church. The rules on trees caused great confusion in 2016, and these have been simplified as to what permission is needed for work on trees. Another very helpful change is that temporary minor reordering via an archdeacon's licence now lasts for 24 months rather than 15, before a parish has to apply for a faculty or reinstate things as they are. This will allow parishes to have a meaningful period of experimentation with, say, a nave altar or a children's corner, before having to apply for a faculty or to make the reordering permanently. Finally, I welcome the new Part 4 to the faculty jurisdiction rules. It lays out very clearly a process to be followed by the DAC to help parishes consult in a timely way. Although the response time for amenity societies has increased from 28 to 42 days, I do not believe that this will hold up the process of faculties for parishes in practice, as they will now be encouraged to begin the consultation period earlier, and this will also be beneficial in helping parishes to avoid last-minute and also expensive changes to plans as a result of the representations of consultees. I very much ask you to support these faculty jurisdiction rules because I believe they will help release parishes into spending more time on mission and ministry. Thank you.
Thank you. I now put a motion for closure on this item to Synod. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. I call upon the Chair of the Rule Committee to respond. He has up to 5 minutes. But in view of the tightness of time, it is to be hoped that he might not quite need 5.
Thank you very much, General Synod, for a helpful debate. To the Archdeacon of Oxford, I too join in saluting the work of DACs. I believe that his concern about the working of A1B for repointing works is probably misconceived, because such repointing would be works materially affecting the fabric and therefore excluded from List A in any event. So far as Paul Ayres is concerned, thank you for your thoughtful contribution. You're troubled about a number of matters in which parishes are now going to have much greater independence. Overall, we believe one simply got to trust to the good sense and responsibility of the parishes, and that's been our guiding principle wherever we've thought that to be appropriate. So far as the extended period of 42 days, 2 points. First of all, if you are consulting an amenity society, it really isn't reasonable to expect them to have visited the church and produced a considered report in 28 days. It's just not possible. They're voluntary bodies. The churches may be at a considerable distance. The 42 days is needed. But if the parish gets its act together, it'll do it themselves at an early stage. It will have had in their response, and therefore there will be no need for the DAC to consult them in any event. I'm afraid the guidance can't change what's in the rules, but the rules will be amended in the light of further experience. Happily, I will be retired by that stage, but I can assure you they'll come back if anything in the rules is found not to be working satisfactorily. Thank you to Tim Jones for his observations. I refer him, though, to Rule 4.7.4, that where a statutory body doesn't respond to consultation, well, then the DAC can simply proceed in the absence of a response. I appreciate the comments of Judy Ziegel and the Archdeacon of Halifax, and they were both supportive, as one would expect, having been members of the committee, but they both made a very useful contribution during that work. I commend these rules to you.
Thank you. I now put item 509 to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. Item 509 is clearly carried, and so the Faculty Jurisdiction Amendment Rules 2019 will now be laid before both Houses of Parliament. Thank you very much. That includes this item of business, and we will now move on to items 505 and 506.
and 506, draft amending canon number 40, GS 2103B. This is Article 7 business. So the Synod has reached the final approval stage for draft amending canon number 40, and that members who need the draft amending canon GS 2103B and the petition for the royal assent and license GS 2103C. As required by Standing Order 102, I declare on behalf of the presidents, the prosecutors of the convocations, and the chair and vice chair of the House of Laity that the requirements of Article 7 of the Constitution have been complied with in respect of drafting amending canon number 40. And I call upon the Bishop of Manchester to move item 505, that amending canon number 40 be finally approved.
Thank you, Your Grace. Members of Synod, I'm delighted to present draft amending canon 40 to you for its final stages. Archbishop Justin has set out very clearly that the revival of the religious life is a necessary condition for the renewal of the Church. The good news is that we are seeing such a revival take place at this present time, with new communities seeking acknowledgement or recognition by the Church of England springing up from diverse roots. Some of these are very new groupings. Others represent existing organisations who are discovering that the fullness of their journey with Christ impels them towards the accountability, the discipline, and the belonging which religious communities embody. Alongside this, the Church continues to be blessed by those communities which came from the revivals of the 19th and 20th centuries. This canon began its journey, Synod, as a response to the question of how the Church of England could remove some of the barriers to the flourishing of our religious communities. Barriers which come as a consequence of the lack of having any formal status within the canons of the Church. At present, it's hard to authorise ordained ministries in many communities, to ordain clergy to title posts within them, and to include them properly in the synodical and governance structures of the Church at local level. This canon and the miscellaneous provisions measure also being considered today will together enable us to begin to reduce and remove some of those obstacles. Along the way, though, we've become more aware of the need for a canon in order to properly support and oversee the work of safeguarding in our religious communities. As Archbishop Justin has already said to Synod, the recently published ICSA report relating to the abuse perpetrated by Peter Ball under the cover of setting up religious communities is truly shocking. Like many of us here today, I live with a sense of shame and disgust as the proper human and Christian response to reading that report. It was published since our February group of sessions, and it contains 5 recommendations which ICSA expects the Church of England to respond to with speedy action. I want to read the first recommendation to you in full. Recommendation 1, introduction of safeguarding guidance for religious communities. The Church of England should introduce appropriate guidance which deals with safeguarding within the context of a religious community affiliated to the Church. It must ensure that these organisations meet adequate requirements for safeguarding and child protection. The needs of victims should be prioritised when designing safeguarding policies and practices. The regulation and management of religious communities should include a mandatory requirement both to have and to follow safeguarding guidance. The requirement to comply with this safeguarding guidance should be the same as would be expected in any other church institution. There needs to be clarity in respect of how safeguarding should be managed in these communities, along with appropriate auditing of compliance. In an earlier debate this morning, we reflect on how important it was that cathedrals are not left without accountability, and that same logic applies to our religious communities. Mandatory requirements, ICSA says, the same as would be expected in any other church institution. Those will not be possible whilst the legal status of communities affiliated, in the words of ICSA, to the Church of England remains undefined in canon. What I'm asking you to do today, therefore, is a necessary part of our being able to meet what ICSA asks of us. You have seen and voted in favour of this draft canon before at both the initial and revision stages. They took place here last summer and in London in our February group of sessions. No changes have been proposed since then, and I'm glad to be able to present this item to you in a form that I hope you will recognise from last time round. For that reason, I don't propose to take you through the text of the draft canon clause by clause. Instead, I'm confining myself to comments on its general thrust and onto the processes before it. Should this canon be approved and complete its remaining legal stages, we will then need a synod to turn our attention to the regulations that the House of Bishops will be empowered to make under it. In a debate last February, a number of points were made which Synod determined not to address by amending the text of the canon itself, but where we agreed it would be appropriate to deal with them via the regulations and the guidance that the House of Bishops will produce. If you look closely among all your papers, you may have found GS MISC 1234. This document is the current draft of what such regulations might look like. Straight after February, we worked on an early version. That was shared at a meeting to which the leaders of our religious communities were invited in May, a very well-attended day, and then that draft was considered by the House of Bishops Committee on the Religious Life a couple of weeks ago. I hope it will assist members of Synod in voting for the canon today to have the best indication we can give of what the regulations we hope to bring to you next year will look like, and that you'll see we've taken on board the substantive points that were made in our group of sessions in February. Passing the canon will allow the regulations to be finalised. However, it's important to note that when such regulations are laid by the House of Bishops before Synod, we get a simple yes or no vote. There's no space for amendment on the floor of the Synod. Only the House of Bishops can propose amendments. Hence, I'd be grateful if any of you who have comments on GS MISC 1234, and I suspect someone in the Synod office thought that was a proper number to be assigned to a document that was going to be introduced to you by a mathematician. Any of you have comments on GS MISC 1234 would let me have them by the middle of October at the latest, so that the Committee of the House can consider them in due course. With that in mind, I invite Synod to support the approval of amending Canon 40 through the motion that stands in my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop. Item 505 is open for debate. May I remind members that under Standing Order 64, motions for the closure, the speech limits, or next business are not in order in this debate. The item is open for debate. Brother Thomas, and then followed by Sister Catherine Harvey.
Thomas Seville, Religious Communities 446. I want to record my deep appreciation for the attention, work and courtesy of both the legal office and of the Bishop of Manchester in the progress of this canon. Religious, certainly of the traditional kind, are quite weird in some ways. We use words in strange ways, and that has been treated with understanding, great understanding, by the legal office, and we're very pleased at the progress this has been made. If I may be allowed to refer back to a comment made, which met with some puzzlement, I think, by a member of the Synod in the February sessions, and namely the reference to Article 14 of our 39 articles on works of supererogation. I had a conversation with the speaker, the Archdeacon of Leeds, and it was clear to me that I really ought to have welcomed his comments. And it was about the nature of calling particular callings. The article condemns the idea that those who think they do more for Christ's sake than a bounden duty is required, it makes you a better Christian. And I'm not quite sure that I, as a religious, do more than I think I am required to do. I think in those terms. But it's, I think, inimical to the religious vocation to think of it as a way of being a better Christian. And there is a danger, I think, in any particular vocation, whether it's religious or not, of thinking that your particularity, your strangeness, is a mark of being something special. It's a human security in that respect, and not one which rests on the assurance of divine grace. And there is the danger that you end up condescending, looking down on those who are not so particular. That's an abiding temptation, I think, for many people, and I would include myself in that, and I repent of it. The grace of our calling is something which is common. We had that wonderful Bible study from Isabel Hamley earlier this morning. A royal priesthood. All our callings are part of that one and royal and priestly calling from our Lord Jesus Christ. All our calling is of grace, royal and priestly. And that means that all our particularities are likewise, but because they are part of that one calling. There is no advance, there is no lessening of that calling because one is particular. No grace which is greater before or after. We sang on Sunday that great hymn of Wesley, Can It Be? And that has that marvellous repeated line, "'Tis mercy all, immense and free." And that's the true of any calling, religious, lay, red, yellow, blue, whatever. All is the grace of one calling. And I thank the Archdeacon of Leeds for prompting me to make those comments.
Catherine Harvey, Religious Communities 449. My appearance and constituency are a declaration of my interest in this item. I'm also a member of the steering committee. I am a not very robust specimen of an endangered species. When I became a novice in the Sisters of the Love of God 45 years ago, I was given a little book, bound and inscribed by my fellow novices, listing the whole community. Then I had 70 sisters. Now I have 20. There were others of roughly my age. Now there is no one under 50, and the majority are, like me, over 70. This decline in numbers is in some measure common to all the recognised communities. I don't have the latest figures, but between 2017 and 2018, the numbers in Europe, and almost all of them are in England, declined from 409 to 381. There have been some life professions, but these by no means balance the deaths we have noted in the last year. It does seem ironic that after the more than 150 years of religious life in the Church of England, the Church has chosen a time when we appear to be in terminal decline to recognise and regulate us by a canon. When I asked the reason for this, timing of this canon, the answer most often given was safeguarding. It is, of course, right that the shame of the Church and her penitence and purpose of amendment should have concrete expression in this form. The need has been highlighted by the death of our brother Peter Poole, on whose soul may God have mercy. Many of the religious I have spoken to find it hard to rejoice in the recognition we and the acknowledged communities are being given by the proposed canon. Some of us have focused more on our misgivings, not so much about the canon itself as the regulations depending on it. We have seen which we have seen in draft form. I must emphasise that what the regulations require is, for the most part, what communities are already doing under the guidance of what we know of as the handbook. However, my community is probably not alone in having work to do in making explicit our responsibilities in relation to safeguarding. Perhaps it is too much to ask of a canon that it be a channel of hope and of grace. However, the other response to my question, why now, was a reference to Archbishop Justin's priority of the renewal of prayer and religious life. We need the help of each one of you to make real and life-giving this connection. When you press button 1, I ask you to undertake to start a conversation with us or about us that will rekindle our hope. And will you please pray that we may live to the glory of God for the sake of the world.
I see no one standing, so I call the Bishop of Manchester to reply to the debate.
Thank you very much. I feel very underdressed for participating in this debate today. Well, thank you to Brother Thomas, and thank you for your kind remarks regarding the legal office. I would want to pay particular tribute to Alex McGregor for working with us in the detail of this, but also, as he's now come back into the room, the Bishop of Winchester, who's particularly in the early stages, gave us some of the vision for the work that underlies all of this. Article 14 on works of supererogation. Yes, the religious life is not about creating a better class of Christian. It's a particular way of living out our baptism. Having said that, if you think I'm bad now, imagine what I might look like if I didn't have the discipline of being a Franciscan tertiary to help keep me somewhere a little closer to the straight and narrow. Sister Catherine, an endangered species, and some of those figures, when we look back at the reduction in numbers, it's not just the Church of England or the Anglican Communion. If we look across the Roman Catholic Church, very similar factors there. But again, there are new things coming into birth, new things coming into being in line with the Archbishop's priority, which are to be blessed and to be encouraged at the same time as we continue to pray for the revival and renewal of existing communities. You're right to say that much of what the regulations are likely to require, they're only in an indicative form at the moment, are what communities are already doing, but that will need to be made explicit in the way communities are doing this work. And I think much of what we're doing in the whole field of safeguarding at the moment is becoming more explicit, because sometimes it's only when you become explicit you discover where there actually was a gap. You thought you got some particular thing covered, it was all implicit, it was all understood, and then when you try and write it down you realise it isn't quite as there as you thought that it was. But thank you for reminding us that we're doing this not just for reasons of damage limitation, but to generally promote the work of the Holy Spirit through the religious communities in our generation. Thank you, Archbishop, for this report.
Thank you very much. The question is that draft amending canon number 40 be finally approved. In accordance with Standing Order 37, I order a counted vote by houses.
I am now about to ring the bell to warn members that a counted vote is to take place. 2 minutes after it ceases, the counted vote will begin.
Need to be ready again.
think it's always a pity, I could say.
The question is that draft amending canon number 40 be finally approved. This is a counted vote by houses. Those in favour should press 1. Those against should press 2. Those who wish to record an abstention should press 3.
The voting period is now open and will end in 1 minute. The voting period will end in 15 seconds. The voting period has now ended.
They voted in the House of Bishops in favour 23, against none, recorded abstentions none. They voted in the House of Clergy in favour 100, against none, recorded abstention none. They voted in the House of Laity 111, against none, recorded abstention none. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. I call upon the Bishop of Manchester to move item 506, that the petition for Her Majesty's Royal Assent and License GS 2103C be adopted.
Thank you, Your Grace. Given the enthusiasm with which we just voted for the canon, I therefore propose that the petition for Her Majesty's Royal Assent and Licence be adopted.
Is there any debate? Thank you very much. The petition will... I put this to the vote. This requires a simple majority. Those in favour, please show. To the contrary, any recorded abstentions? Thank you very much. The petition has passed. Therefore, the petition will accordingly be presented to Her Majesty the Queen. That concludes this particular item. Thank you very much.
behind you. Literally.
Presses.
Yeah, that's a good question.
We are now at item 15 on the agenda, the presentation on the Archbishop's Council's annual report. You will find the paper GS 2138 useful for this item. There will be an opportunity for questions on this presentation, and I will take these in groups of 2. The next item is timed business and is due to start not later than 12:20 p.m. So please do formulate your questions as succinctly as possible. Mary and Ian, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. We're very grateful for the opportunity to present to Synod about the work carried out in 2018 as the Archbishop's Council seeks to support the whole of the Church in its mission and ministry. And of course, this is referring to the calendar year 2018, and we've seen all through this session of Synod how this work has continued to develop and debates continue on each of the issues. The Councils continue to bring to life policies and approaches agreed and endorsed by General Synod to help bring more people to come to faith in Jesus Christ and to grow in their discipleship, as expressed in our 9 objectives on the screen. Number 7 is safeguarding, and obviously we could treat that simply as one of the objectives, but the issues around safeguarding are clearly much more important than simply one item amongst many. And I just wanted to say that within the Council we're extremely aware all the time of the importance of this issue. We discuss it at every agenda. We are paying acute attention to the results of ICSA, and we've been reminded of all of that in the discussions that we've had so far in this Synod. And I think on the Council it's true to say we're particularly minded of the questions that were raised about resources, and we continue to discuss that and want to ensure that we allocate the appropriate resources so that we're doing everything we can to ensure that the Church is a safe place for all people. Also in the report there are particular details of publications during the last year which support that programme. The Council continues to be active in supporting churches to focus on mission and evangelism as a first priority. I don't think it's accidental that we put this number 1 amongst our 9 objectives. A total of £64 million of strategic development funding grants was allocated to 23 dioceses last year. Again, it's worth consulting the Strategic Investment Board report. It's a separate document which you've had in your pack to look at the details of those and seeing how the work is continuing to spread and to develop and being taken up by dioceses right across the country. It's aiming to create new worshiping communities in a wide range of social contexts, often in communities where not only the Church has been historically weak in its presence, but often increasingly now where local services and charities are failing to invest. So there's an ambitious programme of work in city centres, in coastal areas, in market towns, in housing estates, and in rural areas as well. That allocation also includes £12 million, which was given to dioceses to support them in strategic capacity to improve missional and financial strength. Alongside this, the Council oversaw distribution of grants for dioceses who minister in lower income communities under the established formula. Related to the strategic investment, of course, is the national initiatives in digital development, and that included launching an Alexa skill, which means people can ask for daily prayer, for grace to be said, or to find a church. And as you'll be aware, the launch garnered much coverage in the media, including interviews on BBC National Television.
Bless, O Lord, this food to our use, and us in your service.
I should comment that Alexa normally works with the sound on the whole time. So. There's a natural link between evangelism, seeing people come to faith, and discipleship, seeing people grow in faith. And that link is evident when we look at the other range of issues in digital development. I hope some people were able to go to the Fringe meeting last night. Last year saw the biggest Easter and campaigns to date. An estimated 7.4 million people were reached by the Follow the Star campaign and with its excellent supporting literature. We also saw our first Christmas advertisement film encouraging people to attend a Christmas service. For the first time, there was a new app offering reflections through Christmas right up to Epiphany, and more than 120,000 booklets on this were sold, which is a 50% rise on the previous year. Live Lent, a 6-week discipleship journey, had a reach of 3.54 million across the Church of England social media channels. I should follow on the Bishop of Manchester's comment that those who love the statistics will really love the digital stuff because we can measure things extremely accurately. And a significant emphasis has been on discipleship under the Setting God's People Free programme, with new learning communities set up in 24 different dioceses. Talking Jesus was also launched in 2018, providing both inspiration and practical suggestions to help people talk about God with those with whom they meet.
Efforts to foster vocations continued with the launch of the Great Vocations Conversation, supported by prayer, study and reflection materials. And the Ministry Experience Scheme has been taken up now by 20 dioceses, with 95 young people participating in a year-long placement, and that was a growth of 17%. It was really heartening to see another rise in the number of vocations. 587 people started ordination training, an increase of 8% and a welcome step towards the aim of recruiting 50% more candidates by 2020. And positive news too, that the cohort is both younger and more diverse than previously. Looking to the future, the Council initiated a programme of work to develop a shared vision for ministerial education. Regional conferences brought together principals of theological colleges, DDOs, directors of ministry and bishops to consider how best to equip the Church of England to fulfil its mission in the future. Part of that mission is, of course, to transform our society and communities so that they more closely reflect the kingdom of God. The Council's role in that is to coordinate major initiatives agreed by this synod, to provide support to bishops as they engage in policy debates, and to celebrate and promote learning from the wealth of activity undertaken locally. Last year, bishops spoke publicly about a wide range of issues, including child poverty, modern slavery, and gambling, the latter having a direct impact on the reduction of the maximum stake on fixed odds betting terminals. And bishops also encouraged government to commit to a target of net zero emissions by 2050. The Council pressed forward with its environmental programme as a whole, and that, of course, has the potential to influence all our 16,000 churches, 10,000 church yards, and 4,700 schools. The potential is enormous. More than 2,000 churches are now running on green energy tariffs, and more than 700 were registered last year as eco-churches. The Plasticless Lent campaign, that's slightly difficult to say, received widespread parish support and global media coverage. A joint accord was signed with 2 government departments to set out plans for how our churches could host new digital infrastructure to boost connectivity in hard-to-reach areas. More wonderful, but perhaps less widely known and shared across the whole country, is the enormous range of activities being carried out by people in churches up and down England to support their communities. Last year, we counted more than 33,000 projects, and 16,700 were either led or held in churches, of which this is just one.
I'm Margaret Extance. In 2013, two of us had to leave working in school, and we were praying about how we could use our talents for baking. So it started with two of us baking, feeling very silly because we didn't know if anybody was going to turn up. We put some adverts in the local shops and in the surgery and in the library, and it's just grown. It is very easy to be lonely. It's very easy to feel that you're isolated. And a lot of the people who come, it isn't because they have some medical difficulty, it's just simply to be part of a family, be part of a community, to be somewhere where people remember your birthday, and somewhere where people know your name and welcome you in. We have people within the community who particularly look out for other individuals. They tend to sit on the same table, but that means they know when somebody's missing. One of the things that's really struck us is we have a lot of men who come, and the men are brilliant at drawing one another in. There's a dominoes table, there's all sorts that go on, and it's just been really exciting to watch, and we haven't planned any of it. Everybody who comes, they all come in and then go out saying, this is different. And they can't put their finger on what's different, but they know they felt welcome, and they felt that it was something special. And as far as we're concerned, it's God. It's inviting God in, and it's letting go and letting God, and just seeing Him at work.
Church of England schools are the largest single provider of education in England, and our role as the established church ensures that 1 million pupils from all backgrounds attend them. These are not faith schools, but church schools for the community, with our vision being to equip a new generation of young people to shape society and contribute meaningfully to the world. And towards the end of last year, we were involved in discussion with the House of Bishops about the Growing Faith Report, which I think will significantly strengthen this provision and connect it with the making of disciples. 2018 also saw the development of Diocesan Education Leaders Programme, and established a leadership network for our multi-academy trust leaders. The Council provided specialist services and support to churches and dioceses over a range of areas, and this continued to develop during the year. Around 650 churches have taken up the opportunity to offer cashless payments. I noted a little cashless booth at York Minster yesterday, and a further 20 churches have taken up contactless collection plate through the provisions of the parish buying scheme. The Church Finder website, A Church Near You, was also enhanced to allow parishes to create their own mini websites. During 2018, people from 1,000 churches were trained in how to better use social media and their websites to share their life of the faith, their faith communities with those around them. The way that clergy apply for new roles is changing. The Pathways service, set up with funding from the Archbishop's Council in 2017, grew again in 2018. We've now 33 subscribers, of which 30 are dioceses, and more than 983 ministry posts were advertised. The Clergy Transition Service, a new feature of Pathways, has helped more than 60 clergy with free confidential support when looking for opportunities or direction.
Questions of governance, though not necessarily the most exciting part on the surface of our work, can make an enormous difference, both to good stewardship of our resources and to the delivery of ministry. And Council has worked in taking forward decisions by this Synod to simplify governance and to take away potential barriers to ministry and mission. We've also worked during the year to take forward plans to make it easier to minister with colleagues in churches that do not share the same national structure as the Church of England. We've talked a lot about cathedrals this morning. And last year, the Council worked in support of the Cathedral's Working Group, bringing forward the proposals for consultation to Synod during the year. We are committed in the Council to playing our part in ensuring that the Church of England is a welcoming community for everyone. The Council's Minority Ethnic Vocations Conference, which ran for its 5th year in 2018, continued to encourage young BAME Anglicans to consider ordained vocations. And we rejoice that the proportion of ordinands who entered training increased to 7.7%, and the proportion of stipendiary clergy who describe themselves as being from that background also increased to 3.8%. The Council picked up the challenge to increase the welcome and participation for people with disabilities. Archbishop Justin hosted a major conference at Lambeth Palace to listen to those with lived experience of disability. And the more than welcome support resource that followed it is designed to help churches move through a process of welcome, inclusion and involvement to full participation. A major focus for strategic development funding has been in areas of social deprivation. By the end of 2018, £36 million, or around 30% of the overall funding, had been awarded to support mission in areas whose experience of the Church was of neglect and withdrawal. These projects bring new resources, fresh energy and vision for a hopeful future. And that's the thread that runs through all the work of the Archbishop's Council, the bringing together of ideas, policies and resources in service of all who work in Christ's name to bring the good news to the people of England and to reinvigorate Christian communities for a new generation. Before I end, I just want to say that many of you I know understand the commitment that what we owe to the commitment, skill and sheer hard work of the staff team led by William Nye. And so on behalf of my fellow council members, and I hope you will want to join me too, I would like to thank them for all the work they did for us in 2018, but in every year. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions? The man in the blue shirt, please, followed by the man in the green shirt.
Mike Stallybrass, York 439. Thank you very much for that presentation, and I'm very encouraged by what I'm seeing happening on the digital scene. But the number of people who are being trained to be able to help in the digital work, I think, needs to be greatly expanded. I'm just asking, has the Archbishop's Council considered training where, in my profession, we often train the trainers as opposed to just training the end user?
And now I'll call on Mr. Charles Reid to put his question, and then I'll invite Mary and Ian to respond.
Charles Reid, Norwich 181. While this is very encouraging to hear about increased numbers of ordinands, can you explain why you use the word vocation when you really mean vocation to ordained ministry? Whatever happened to the ministry of the whole people of God?
Thank you, Mike, for your question about digital training. Yes, I totally agree with you there. I wasn't able to go to the presentation last night. Were you able to go there? Oh, okay. Certainly we recognise the importance of digital and of unfolding that right through the church. I think also many people's experience is that there is a generation who are digital natives And so at one level, don't need that training. They're already living in that world. And it's really a question for many of the rest of us of playing catch-up. And we certainly have looked at the digital team and its resources, and during this year, obviously doesn't apply from last year's report, have agreed to increase funding there, but certainly there's a huge amount of potential. On the use of vocations, I think that's just Charles' shorthand for us giving a summary of a report in a brief time, and I think there's absolutely no doubt that every member of the Council recognises that vocation is for everybody. The Council's published resources on that. Some of them are downstairs by the information desk if you want to pick one up, and we're absolutely behind the report on setting all God's people free, and it's something we revisit at every point. But we also recognise that vocations to ordained ministry are also important.
The man in the black T-shirt, please, followed by Gavin Oldham.
Anderson Jeremiah, Universities and TEIs. Thank you for that wonderful report. What I'm interested is that how can we instill that the Church of England and all that wonderful things that you're doing is part of the global church, that it's not just the Church of England, that we are connected and networked with the global universal church.
Gavin Oldham, Oxford 378. Last year, a year ago, we heard the awful statistics about the resources in estates evangelism in basically urban estates compared with rural parishes, for example. I'm hugely encouraged that 36 million has gone into socially deprived areas. But I wonder, would it be possible for both the Archbishop's Council and the House of Bishops to look into a new approach to mutual support, which would run on a voluntary basis by twinning, so we didn't just rely on this top-down, but we actually shared our resources much better within the church as a whole?
Thank you. These will be the last two questions, I'm afraid, and if you could reply fairly briefly, that would be appreciated.
On the matter of working globally or more widely, I don't think we should underestimate the power and network of the Anglican Communion. And there are already many, many projects with different parts of the Anglican Communion. Working with other churches, I mean, a very practical example, outside of the discussions that we had yesterday about the Covenant, we are working practically together with the Methodists on the environment and on housing issues. So there is already an outreach, and it can only be limited by the amount of resource that we can put against it.
Gavin, thank you very much for your... I've lost you. There you are, Gavin. For your comment on state evangelism. I think that's obviously a very sensible issue. The first place where, of course, that needs to happen is within a diocese, but then there are big regional differences as well. You'll have seen the news that Stephen Hance has just been announced today that he's been appointed to join the team in Church House, and I think that's part of the continuing strengthening of the evangelism team. And I think those looking at all areas of strategy, I think, would do well to pick up your comment. I'd also like to say thanks for those several people who said that they enjoyed the report and they were encouraged by it. I'm glad to see that. I think actually I was very encouraged by it as well. And it's been really interesting to see during the last 3 or 4 years in my membership of the Archbishop's Council how many things are actually beginning to come together in some sort of strategic coherence. That's not to say that we're solving all the problems and there isn't more work to be done, but I think we really should take some encouragement in a way that particularly things like the SDF, which in its early days was a little bit, as it were, rough and ready in terms of issues around governments and mechanisms and so on, but how things are really working well together. And I just hope that over the next 5 years, that development will continue. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our speakers. That concludes this item of business.
Synod, we now come to item 16, the appointment of a member of the Archbishop's Council. There's two documents to refer to, GS 2139 and the 15th notice paper, the yellow one that gives us more information about Maureen. The proposal is that this will fill a vacancy created by Mary Chapman's term of office coming to an end at the end of this year. So I'd like to call upon the Archbishop of Canterbury to move the motion, and he has up to 10 minutes.
Justin Welby, 001, Canterbury. He was behind you, Chair. Thank you to the Chair and to members of Synod. As members will be deeply aware, the Archbishop's Council was established by the National Institutions Measure of 1998. When the Synod was debating that legislation, as many of you will remember, it agreed that 10 of the 19 places on the Council should be filled through various synodical elections. 3 by the Archbishops and three being the Archbishops and 1 the Estates Commissioners are ex officio, and 6 should be for the Archbishops to appoint with the approval of the Synod. We are now asking you for your approval on this appointment. The current vacancy will arise from the retirement of Mary Chapman on 31st December 2019 at the end of her term of office. Since I have so long to speak, Chair, I want to just add a few words of thanks to Mary Chapman. Mary has borne heavy burdens on the Archbishop's Council over the years that I've been on it, in terms particularly of her extraordinarily assiduous and burdensome work on the Audit Committee. Burdensome not because the people are particularly difficult, quite the reverse. She was served by excellent staff, really outstanding staff, and the other members of the committee. But it is a work of detail and a work that is well hidden, but is essential to the success of the Archbishop's Council, and is one that is often demanding when there are requirements for events to be reported to the Charity Commission. In addition, she has been someone who has always raised points that needed raising, has been assiduous in raising issues that we needed to face and not letting us just dodge by difficult questions. She has been an essential and remarkable member of the Council, and on all our behalves, I would like to thank her very much indeed. GS 2139 sets out the recruitment process that we have followed for her successor. The Archbishop of York and I, and those who advised us on the appointments, believe that Maureen will be able to make an equal and equally considerable contribution to the work of the Council. She is a member of St Luke's, Gamston and Bridgeford Church in Nottingham. She was a senior manager in Marks & Spencer and Boots before working as a church growth officer and then diocesan secretary in Derby Diocese. There she was involved in securing a strategic development funding bid for St Werburgh's Church in Derby. Maureen is now a trustee for the Pottingshed Church, which is a rural resource church, which was initiated as part of the first SDF bid for Sutherland Nottingham. She is also involved in Diocesan life, mentoring clergy and lay leaders, and is on the Finance Committee, Diocesan and Deanery Synods. In addition, she is actively involved with 2 charities in Africa, one being 5 Talents, which works in partnership with local Anglican dioceses and therefore brings an on-the-ground familiarity with the issues of the Anglican Communion. As you can see from her background, Maureen is passionate about seeing churches grow in numbers and in spiritual depth and flourish through local mission and individuals sharing their faith, and sees the importance of the national church serving local parishes and chaplaincies and all other expressions of local church as they seek to deliver their mission and ministry. We believe that her presence on the Archbishop's Council will strengthen it very remarkably. I therefore beg to move the motion standing in my name.
Synod, we have about 5 minutes before we need to finish for lunch, so I'd be willing to take, if anyone wishes to, make a point, ask a question, Paul Benfield. And then I will move a motion to close debate. Speech limit 2 minutes.
Paul Benfield, Blackburn 66. I have nothing against Maureen Cole. In fact, I've met her and worked with her in the past on something. But I do have a problem with the way this is being done. We only had notice that Maureen was to be proposed this morning. I wonder if it could be explained, since the interviews took place at the end of June, why we could not have had a notice paper earlier telling us the name of this person, so we might have wanted to make further inquiries. I think there's a danger that we're just being used as a rubber stamp, which is unfortunate.
Okay, I'll take Sue Boyce and then ask the Archbishop to reply. Speech limit still 2 minutes. Hopefully you're going to explain.
Absolutely. Boys, Oxford 186, Father Benfield and members of Synod, I'm very sorry. This was an oversight that we realised at our business committee meeting at 8:15 this morning, and thanks to the amazingly fast reaction of the staff, it was put right almost immediately. But you do have my sincere apologies. That paper should have reached you sooner.
So I'd like to close debate on item 16. Are you in agreement to that? Thank you. Any against? Archbishop, would you like to respond to the debate?
No, thank you.
So I'd like to put item 16 to the vote, that Maureen Cole is appointed as a member of the Archbishop's Council until December 2024. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Any against? That is quite clearly carried. Now, I have been informed that Maureen is actually with us this morning. Is that correct? Maureen, would you like to stand and thank you. Welcome to the Archbishop's Council. So that concludes item 16. It also brings us to lunch. We'll see you again at 2:30. Thank you.
going to